But I do believe we have to focus now on a new challenge, which is jiu-jitsu must develop its own autonomous approach to standing position and takedowns. This will remove the second great weakness of jiu-jitsu. This has to be the one of the major concerns of all jiu-jitsu coaches over the next 10 years. We did it with leg locks. I confidently believe we can do the same thing with standing position.
So do you think it's something that has to be done differently?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I believe the greatest mistake that has been made in jiu-jitsu training with regards to standing position and takedowns has been that jiu-jitsu coaches and athletes have looked at other grappling styles that do have a strong emphasis in standing position and takedowns and used a very naive approach of just copying and pasting techniques from those martial arts and hoping they will work in a jiu-jitsu context. You have to understand that the rules and desiderata of jiu-jitsu standing position is radically different from other grappling styles. Let's say, for example, you went to a wrestling school to learn takedowns for jiu-jitsu. The first thing you're going to notice is that if you try to apply wrestling grip fighting in a gi context for competition jiu-jitsu with a gi, all the hand fighting is completely different based on whether it's no gi or gi. So wrestling has excellent lower body takedowns, but completely inappropriate grip fighting for gi jiu-jitsu competition. Then if you go to judo and say, well, they wear a kimono just like we do, so that's going to solve the grip fighting problem. Then you look at the rules and regulations of judo and find that they're radically different from jiu-jitsu. The whole nature of what constitutes a successful throw in judo is completely different from jiu-jitsu. In judo, the intent is to throw your opponent with momentum and force onto his back. The greater the amplitude of the throw, the more reward you're given. In jiu-jitsu, the smallest throw scores the same points as the biggest throw. In judo, once the throw is completed, the match is over. In jiu-jitsu, it's just begun. There's such massive differences between the rule sets and what the athletes are trying to accomplish between jiu-jitsu and judo and wrestling, et cetera, that you can't just use a naive approach of learning a takedown from another martial art and then just trying it in a jiu-jitsu match. Jiu-jitsu needs its own standalone approach to the standing position, which fits well with its own unique rule sets and the unique demands of the sport. We can't just use this copy and paste approach, which we've been using for the last 20 years. I think this is going to be the second great challenge of my career as a coach. I believe the leg lock challenge has been largely overcome. There's still work to be done, of course, but no one would. If people looked at a modern jiu-jitsu competition, they would not say, "Hey, these guys don't know anything about leg locks." They would be like, "Oh, these guys are damn good at leg locks." Now we need to do the same thing with standing position and takedowns. We have to evolve an approach to the standing position, which is well suited to the unique demands of the sport of jiu-jitsu, rather than just trying to bring on a few techniques and copy and paste and see what we can do. The most valuable study points are going to be judo for gi competition and wrestling for no gi. But there has to be a concerted program of modification and adaptation so that we can take what is desirable from a judo or wrestling context and then make it desirable in a jiu-jitsu context. There are certain throws in judo which work extremely well in judo, given their rule set, but which are completely inappropriate for the sport of jiu-jitsu. The same thing can be said of wrestling. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating and interesting challenge for jiu-jitsu over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so I agree and disagree with you in a way, because I think you cannot create it like moves, let's say, on the takedown point of view, on judo, for example. I think, it's all the throws are there. I don't think there's anything to be created. I think it's more to
No.
be adapted. I mean,
With
of course you can, but it's
yeah,
more adaptation.
I'm not talking about technique creation. The major throws of judo were invented right alongside the major groundwork of jiu-jitsu. I'm talking about their application in a competitive situation. There's also such things as technique selection. There are certain throws in judo which work well given the rules of judo. Remember that judo's primary emphasis is on throwing someone with momentum onto their back. Once that occurs, there's no more concern. In jiu-jitsu, I have to be very concerned about how much back exposure have I generated when I perform a throw. It's no good performing a successful throw, but now my opponent's right on my back with 2 hooks in. I got 2 points for a takedown, and he got 4 points for the rear mount. Nowadays, he wouldn't even be scored for the takedown under those conditions. So there has to be a program based around technique selection. What are the techniques of judo and wrestling which are appropriate for the sport of jiu-jitsu? There also has to be a whole context that there are certain skills in jiu-jitsu which are simply not allowed in judo or strongly discouraged. The idea of setting to guard. If I see someone who's particularly strong in takedowns and standing skills, you always have the option of setting to guard. In jiu-jitsu, you don't really have those options in wrestling or in judo. So jiu-jitsu needs to have a whole approach to the standing position based around the fact that we can do certain things that other grappling styles simply can't do. It's not just about learning some takedowns. It's also about putting them in an overall context of, okay, we're allowed certain things that they're not allowed. There are some takedowns they do which work well in their sport, don't work well in ours. So you're going to have to, rather than inventing new techniques, it's going to be more about technique selection and making their application appropriate for the rule sets of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I fully agree. I think it's more, if you look at judo, is how they, when you're going to throw someone, you fully project yourself into that throw, which it doesn't necessarily, you will maintain a top position after you throw your opponent. You're following up, you allow that, you can roll out of it. Even yourself, a lot of the throws you use, you're so committed to the throw that the momentum carries you on driving you forward. So
correct.
It's hard for you to maintain a top position after you throw. And like you say, back exposure, any like hip throw, in judo, they don't care about, the back. There's no back taking, which in jiu-jitsu, it's fatal.
Yeah, it's the end of the match in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
The idea is that the rule sets of wrestling and judo encourage risk-taking behavior because they value the throw above everything. So you can take huge risks in judo that you could never take in jiu-jitsu. The fundamental difference in the standing position between wrestling, judo, and jiu-jitsu is that wrestling and judo favor risk. They're looking for amplitude of throw and takedown. The more amplitude, the higher the score. In jiu-jitsu, the score is always the same, regardless of amplitude. The smallest takedown scores the same as the biggest takedown. Secondly, jiu-jitsu is fundamentally different from those arts insofar as jiu-jitsu is risk-averse. Okay, jiu-jitsu doesn't reward risk. Judo and wrestling reward risk. The more risk you take, the more points you score. In jiu-jitsu, if you take a risk and expose your back, you're getting punished for taking the risk. Okay, so the whole context of takedowns and standing technique has to be radically changed. There are certain techniques you just wouldn't be likely to use in jiu-jitsu, which are highly successful in both wrestling and judo, just based on the simple idea that they reward risk and jiu-jitsu punishes risk. In general, jiu-jitsu is looking for takedowns that exhibit control rather than amplitude. And so small, low amplitude takedowns, which enable you to finish in a dominant position, are much more appropriate for the jiu-jitsu athlete than big, high amplitude, risky takedowns. And once jiu-jitsu starts to get a handle on this and start to say, okay, the takedowns that we employ are going to be derived from judo and wrestling, no question about that. But the manner in which they're selected and applied ought to be radically different. Building a standing program appropriate for the rules and strictures of jiu-jitsu, I think it's going to be a fascinating coaching challenge.
I think on the stand-up regarding jiu-jitsu, if you look, jiu-jitsu players, they have a bad stand-up game.
Yeah.
Overall, it's like it's terrible. It's it's not bad, it's terrible. Like jiu-jitsu fighters in general, if you look like student-wise, not athletes, but
yes.
athletes. But I think most of jiu-jitsu school is time they spend on the feet. It's very limited. In any school, it's like you teach a class compared to what the time they spend training on the floor, then the time they spend on your feet is a lot less. That's why I think it's an area that people they take much longer to develop, especially normal student. If you look at the beginners class and the intermediate and the advanced, only in the advanced class they get to do like full sparring most of it. The beginners you don't. If you go to a judo academy, you start standing up day one, so you develop a much quicker technique. Your stand up gets much better. I think when you're saying about challenging, first people change to they have to change the way they see, the way they train, they make the school run. They have to spend more time on the feet. That's how you get better. Just like you wanna be good in the guard, you have to practice guard. There's no other way to be good at it.
I'm confident we can do it though. If you look at the current state of standing position in jiu-jitsu, it's as bad as leg locking was in 2010. And yet we find ourselves now in 2020. Jiu-jitsu's leg locking is pretty damn good. I believe with the right kind of coaching program, we can do the same thing with standing position. Right now, we have a very undesirable situation, which is that the overwhelming majority of even expert jiu-jitsu players are simply incompetent in the standing position. Now, what you say about training time is entirely correct, because most of the major point scoring in jiu-jitsu is performed on the ground. The biggest scores in the sport are pins on the floor, not takedowns. Takedowns only score relatively small points. Of course, most of the training is going to be predominantly on the ground. That's only natural. But what we can't have is a situation where jiu-jitsu athletes, even at the highest levels, are killers on the ground, but completely incompetent on the feet. If you look at judo, for example, their best athletes are killers in the standing position, but they are competent on the ground. Okay, they're not completely incompetent on the floor. Jiu-jitsu needs to be the opposite of that. Our athletes should be killers on the ground and competent on the feet. Yeah. Right now, they're killers on the ground, but they're incompetent on the feet. We can't have that. It shouldn't be the case that black belt champions go into competition where the only option they have is pulling guard. They should at least have the option, if the other guy's another jiu-jitsu athlete, they should have the option of being able to perform a takedown. It shouldn't just be the case that they just don't know anything in the standing position. They just have to run and jump guard as quickly as possible. Now, of course, if they're fighting someone who's a specialist in judo or wrestling, of course, the wise thing is to pull guard under those circumstances, of course. But if they come up against someone who's another jiu-jitsu player, then they should pull guard because they want to pull guard, not because they have no option, because they have no other skills. That's what I'm pushing towards. I don't ever see a situation where jiu-jitsu athletes will be better than judo players in the standing position, because 90% of our training is on the floor. But they should at least be competent. They should be able to come out and make a grip, hold a stance properly, take down someone of their own skill level in the standing position if they want to. We can't have situations where champions come scurrying out and just sit to guard because they literally don't know a single standing move. That, I think, we can overcome in a fairly short period of time with a good training program.
Yeah, I think usually people who has a good guard, they have a bad stand-up.
Yeah, I think there's a definite relationship. Yeah.
If you have a top game, you need to be on top, so you need to throw the other, your opponent down.
But I guarantee you will also easily learn a good tominagi or a good sumigaeshi, and they could throw someone from standing position right from the start using the same skills that they use from open guard. People were just alerted to the fact that, there are many forms of takedown which work very, very well for a good guard player. And their skills they're already using on the ground, they could easily adapt them to the standing position. Many of the grip fighting sequences that a good guard player uses on the ground can readily be adapted to the standing position if they just learn stance and motion on top of their grip fighting sequences. Within a fairly short period of time, they could be quite effective in the standing position.
I think it's changing in terms of, if you look back, it's changing, but it's still very slow. If you look a few years ago, there was no stand-up in jiu-jitsu players, zero. You had like one Tomonagi, you have like one guy who has a good judo, and all the rest is just terrible standing and ground game. I think more people, they realize now, that's how important it is to have a good stand-up. I can say that for myself, it changed. I became so much better in every aspect when my stand-up game got better.
Yeah.
And it's, that's when I start develop my guard pass a lot more, because now I get to throw people and stay on top instead of having to pull guard because I'm just not good enough in taking people down,
Yeah, you're a good example of this, Hunter. When you moved to England, your judo got noticeably better, and it had a big impact on your training regimen. You became highly competent in the standing position. Now, of course, if you were going to fight a world-class judo athlete, you would pull guard. That's the right thing to do. But when you fought other jiu-jitsu players, you were often able to throw people with foot sweeps, uchimata, et cetera, and as you said, that made you a much more formidable opponent for them to deal with. I think that we can do that across the board, even though it can be a little depressing to look at standing position jiu-jitsu in competition today. Remember that 10 years ago, it looked pretty depressing to look at leg lock performance in jiu-jitsu. But now it's 180
to look sideways, attack someone's foot. It's like, what are you doing? Back in the days, to attack someone's foot is like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I remember well. Yeah, you're cheating, my God. But we can do the same thing with standing position. And I think that would be an incredible thing for jiu-jitsu. As I said, historically, jiu-jitsu has always had two major weaknesses, leg locks and standing position. I think we've overcome the leg lock one to a large degree. There's still progress to be made, but it's massively better than. And I think we can do the same thing with jiu-jitsu standing position.
Hey guys, most people study jiu-jitsu through instructionals that look clean, but they don't show what actually works under pressure. Here we learn from matches, where technique is proven when everything's on the line. That's how you cut through the noise and see what truly works when it matters. On my Patreon, you'll find free breakdowns from the newest matches I can't post on YouTube, full studies, and complete guides, all built to help you improve faster and train smarter. You can start free right now. The link's in the description and pinned comment. And if you're new, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next study.